Emily carried Buddy in her arms as the late afternoon sun settled behind the Appalachian ridges. The cub had grown since the day she first found him. Curled by a fallen log, his black fur matted his body, trembling from hunger and fear. Now he was heavier but weak, his head resting against her shoulder, his paws hanging limp as though the energy had drained out of him. She whispered to him as they walked toward the wildlife clinic's front door, her voice soft and unsteady. "It's okay, little one. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." For her, this wasn't simply a bear cub. This was family. Inside the small waiting room, the smell of pine cleaner mixed with the faint trace of animal musk. Emily chose the corner seat, holding Buddy tightly against her chest. The receptionist had offered a sympathetic smile, the kind people give when they don't know what else to say. Time moved strangely. Minutes felt like hours. Emily kept stroking Buddy's fur, remembering the clumsy way he once tried to climb her porch railing, the way his round ears perked up when she whistled the playful growl that never sounded threatening but always made her laugh. He was a black bear cub, but to her, he was still the same little creature who used to paw at her boots when she fed him warm milk at dawn. Her throat ached with the thought that this might be the last time. She thought about people she'd known who had lost pets and told her it felt like losing a child. Back then, she nodded politely, not truly grasping the weight of their grief. Now she understood in her bones. When you spend years caring for an animal, wild or domestic, you build a quiet rhythm of life around them. They depend on you for food, safety, and comfort, but you depend on them too for companionship and a sense of purpose. Emily pressed her cheek to Buddy's fur and closed her eyes. "We've had a good run, haven't we?" she murmured. His fur still smelled faintly of earth and leaves, that wild scent that reminded her he never really belonged to her, not in the way a house cat or dog might. He belonged to the forest, to the thick stands of oak and maple that blanketed the mountainsides. Yet fate had pushed him into her arms, and she had never been able to let him go. Dr. Jonathan Reed finally entered the room. His kind eyes softened as he looked at Emily, then at Buddy. He had seen this scene countless times before. Families saying goodbye to beloved pets, rehabilitators, bringing in wild animals that could not be saved. But this moment carried a weight that made him pause. Emily stood, her arms trembling as she shifted Buddy toward him. "He's been getting worse," she whispered. "Every day weaker. I can't watch him suffer." Dr. Reed nodded. He hated this part of his work, but he understood the mercy in it. "I'll give you time," he said gently. "Say your goodbye. When you're ready, I'll come back." He stepped out, leaving the two of them in silence. Emily lowered herself onto the examination bench, Buddy still cradled against her chest. She spoke to him as if he could understand every word. "I wish you knew how much you've given me, Buddy. The mornings we hiked the ridge together, the nights you curled up on that old blanket by the fire. You weren't just a bear cub. You were my reminder that life could still surprise me with something pure." As she spoke, Buddy shifted slightly, his small paw curling against the fabric of her jacket. His movement was faint, almost hesitant, but it was enough to send a rush of tears down her cheeks. That paw felt like a thank you, or maybe a goodbye of his own. For Emily, letting go wasn't just about ending Buddy's pain. It was about admitting she couldn't control everything, that even love couldn't conquer nature's cruel turns. She thought of other caretakers. She knew people who had raised injured owls or fox kits only to watch them fade. Despite every effort, they all said the same thing. You do your best, and then you learn to accept what's beyond you. It was the hardest lesson of all. There's something universal in this moment of surrender. Pet owners, wildlife rescuers, even parents all face that haunting crossroad where care turns into goodbye. The small lesson Emily was discovering, though she didn't want it, was that grief itself proves the depth of connection. If saying farewell hurts this much, it means the time together mattered. She closed her eyes again and tried to picture Buddy, not as he was now, frail. Silent, his once bright eyes dulled, but as the lively cub who tumbled through fallen leaves, who pressed his nose against hers when he wanted attention, who once startled a flock of sparrows just to chase their shadows. That was the Buddy she wanted to remember, That was the image she wanted to keep when the injection came. But beneath all of this emotion, something stirred a strange undercurrent of unease. It wasn't only the grief that filled the room. There was something in Buddy's stillness, the way his breathing shifted in shallow bursts, the faint discoloration on his muzzle. Emily almost brushed it off as imagination, the mind's way of clinging to hope when there is none. Yet a tiny seed of doubt took root. Was this really the end? Or was something else happening inside him? I'll never forget you, little one. If you've ever lost a pet, you know that this kind of goodbye carries a weight unlike anything else. It's not just about death. It's about all the mornings you'll never share again, the routines that suddenly vanish. Some people make the mistake of believing the pain means the love was wasted, but the truth is the opposite. The pain is proof that the love was real. Emily didn't know that Buddy still had a chance. She didn't know that in just a few moments, Dr. Reed would walk back in and notice something that would halt the procedure entirely. She only knew the heaviness in her arms, the steady beat of Buddy's heart against her chest, and the sense that she was about to step off a cliff she could never climb back from. As the door creaked open and Dr. Reed stepped quietly inside, Emily prepared herself for the hardest moment of her life. Yet instead of reaching for his tools, the vet froze, his gaze locked on Buddy's face. Something wasn't right, and that single hesitation, the pause before a final act, would change everything. Dr. Jonathan Reed stood in the doorway for longer than usual. Emily kept her eyes closed, whispering to Buddy, readying herself for the end. But the vet wasn't moving. His gaze had locked onto the bear cub's face, and something didn't add up. "Emily," he said softly. "Hold on a moment." Her eyes flew open. "What is it?" Dr. Reed stepped closer, careful not to startle her or Buddy. He tilted his head, squinting at the cub's muzzle. What he saw sent a ripple through his practiced calm. Buddy's eyes, once deep brown with that familiar wild spark, now reflected an unusual amber tint under the clinic's fluorescent lights. And there was faint redness, almost like a rash, spreading across the soft fur near his nose. Emily tightened her grip. "Is that normal?" Jonathan shook his head. "No, not normal at all." For years he'd treated black bear cubs rescued from the Appalachian hills. He knew what a dying cub looked like: slowed heartbeat, shallow breaths, limp muscles. But this was different. Eye discoloration, skin changes. It pointed somewhere else. He pulled out his penlight and leaned in. Buddy squirmed just slightly at the brightness, proof of a spark left in him. "Emily, has Buddy been on any medication?" She nodded quickly. "Yes. The pain pills you prescribed for his joints, twice a day mixed with his food, but they haven't seemed to help." Jonathan exhaled slowly. His mind connected the dots. Eye color shifts often meant liver stress. Facial redness could signal inflammation or an allergic reaction. Put together, they painted a picture not of natural decline, but of toxicity. Here's the part most caretakers and pet owners don't hear explained. Certain drugs designed for animals, even common ones given for pain or arthritis, can build up inside the liver. The organ tries to filter them, but if it can't keep pace, toxins spread through the bloodstream. Symptoms often mimic aging sluggishness, loss of appetite, and even joint stiffness. From the outside, it looks like the animal is just growing old. In reality, their body is fighting the very medicine meant to help them. Jonathan had read veterinary reports describing similar cases. Cats whose eyes turned yellow because of liver failure. Dogs who suddenly lost energy after weeks on a supposedly safe pill. Sometimes the reaction was rare. Sometimes it was more common than companies admitted. He remembered one case vividly, a golden retriever named Max brought in by an older couple from a nearby town. Max could barely stand. His owners were convinced age was finally taking him, but blood work showed his liver values were off the charts. The culprit, the same class of anti-inflammatory drug Buddy was taking. When they stopped it, Max rallied. He lived another full year, happier, more himself. That memory now pressed hard against Jonathan's thoughts as he studied Buddy. Emily's tears slowed confusion, overtaking sorrow. She brushed a hand along Buddy's cheek, feeling the warmth of the irritated skin. "You think it's the medicine?" Jonathan hesitated, careful with his words. "I think it might be. These signs aren't from old age alone. They could be a reaction. And if that's true, ending his life right now would be a mistake." Emily's heart lurched. The room spun with conflicting emotions: relief, fear, disbelief. She had been ready to let go, to do the merciful thing. Now the possibility opened before her like a sudden doorway. Maybe Buddy's suffering wasn't permanent. Maybe it was preventable. But hope came tangled with doubt. What if stopping the medication only prolonged his pain? What if this small spark was just a cruel tease before the inevitable? This moment revealed something deeper, not just about veterinary medicine, but about human instinct. Too often, when we see decline, we assume finality. We tell ourselves there's no point in questioning further. Yet sometimes decline is a disguise hiding an underlying cause that can be reversed if we pause, observe, and stay curious. Emily realized she had been so focused on preparing for loss that she almost missed the detail that could save Buddy. It's the same mistake many pet owners make, dismissing unusual signs as just old age. The small lesson here: never ignore changes, especially when they appear suddenly. An eye color shift, a rash, a subtle behavior difference. These can speak louder than years of decline. Jonathan leaned back, weighing his options. As a veterinarian, he carried a duty heavier than most people realize. Every decision balanced two edges, protecting animals from suffering and protecting them from mistakes in treatment. He knew pharmaceutical companies rarely highlighted every risk. Sometimes side effects surfaced years after drugs hit the market. But here in this room, theory met reality. The fresh perspective struck him hard. Buddy wasn't dying of age. He might be fighting something man-made. That changed everything. He turned to Emily. "I want to test this theory before we do anything else. Stop his medication. Bring him back in a week. If I'm wrong, we'll revisit this conversation, but if I'm right, you could have your Buddy back." Emily's breath caught. The thought of more time, more mornings, waking to his playful grunts, more evenings watching him chase falling leaves was more than she dared hope. Yet she knew trust required courage. She remembered her neighbor, an older woman named Linda, who once told her about a cat that had been misdiagnosed with kidney failure. The vet had prepared her for goodbye, but Linda insisted on a second opinion. Turned out, it was a treatable infection. The cat lived 3 more years. Sometimes Linda had said the difference between goodbye and another adventure is asking one more question. Now Emily faced the same choice. Ask one more question or accept the end. Jonathan saw the flicker of determination in her eyes. "We'll do it," she whispered. She kissed the top of Buddy's head, her tears no longer only of grief, but of fragile hope. He nodded. "Then let's wait. Let's give him the chance to show us if this is really the end or just the beginning of a different fight." That decision shifted the air in the room. What had felt like a funeral now felt like a pause, a chance for truth to emerge. Emily tightened her embrace around Buddy, her heart racing with both dread and possibility. Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, shadows stretching long across the parking lot. Emily stepped out, carrying Buddy the cub, nestled close, his breathing steady against her chest. She felt the heaviness of uncertainty, but also a spark she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe their story wasn't finished. And in the days ahead, that choice to stop the medicine, to trust the unknown, would lead her into long nights of fear, flickers of hope, and discoveries that neither she nor Jonathan could have imagined. Emily drove home with Buddy nestled in a blanket beside her, the weight of Dr. Reed's words echoing in her mind. "Stop the medicine. See what happens." She had trusted those pills. Every day she mixed them carefully into Buddy's food, believing she was easing his pain. To think they might be hurting him, that possibility gnawed at her. At home, she set Buddy down on his favorite quilt near the wood stove. He curled up, breathing slowly, eyes half closed. She stroked his fur, whispering, "No more pills, Buddy. Let's give you a chance." It felt strange, almost wrong, to break from the routine. Caretakers cling to routines. They're the rope you hold when life feels fragile. But sometimes the rope itself frays, and letting go is the only way to keep climbing. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Jonathan sat at his desk long after closing hours. Case notes spread across his workspace, reports piled high. He typed in Buddy's symptoms: eye discoloration, facial redness, joint stiffness, and cross-checked with veterinary journals. More than once, the same name appeared: a widely prescribed anti-inflammatory marketed as safe for long-term use in dogs and sometimes adapted for wildlife in rehabilitation. The drug worked by suppressing inflammation, but in sensitive animals, it built up toxins in the liver. Over time, those toxins disrupted metabolism, damaged blood cells, and caused the body to mimic signs of age and chronic illness. Owners saw fading energy, loss of appetite, and even stiff joints. They thought time was the enemy, when in fact the medicine itself was the hidden danger. Jonathan rubbed his eyes. He'd prescribed the drug before trusting the data companies provided. But now, looking at Buddy, at Emily's devastated face, he questioned everything. He recalled a case from 2 years earlier. A black bear cub rescued near Asheville had arrived with a broken paw. Treatment went well, but when the cub later showed stiffness and lethargy, Jonathan prescribed the same class of drugs. Within weeks, the cub's condition worsened until it had to be euthanized. At the time, Jonathan blamed complications from the injury. Tonight, he wondered, was that cub another silent victim of the same hidden danger? The thought unsettled him deeply. It wasn't just Buddy's life at stake, it was every animal he had trusted to this medication. At home, Emily stayed by Buddy's side through the night. She listened to his breathing, sometimes shallow, sometimes steady. She thought about people she knew, neighbors, friends who had given pets medicine without a second thought. How many of them had faced decline and assumed it was inevitable? On the third night, Buddy lifted his head at the sound of her footsteps and gave a soft, surprising grunt. Emily's heart leapt. He shifted, pushing against the blanket as though trying to rise. The sight brought both relief and terror. Was this recovery or just a fleeting spark before the end? She scribbled notes in the small journal Jonathan had asked her to keep. Date, time, symptoms, any small change. She clung to the act of documenting, proof that she was doing everything possible to give Buddy a fair chance. In truth, what Emily and Jonathan were uncovering reflects a larger issue pet owners rarely see. Medications for animals, unlike many for humans, sometimes pass through less rigorous testing before reaching the market. Oversight exists, but resources are limited, and companies often emphasize benefits while downplaying risks. This regulatory gap allows harmful side effects to slip through. The lesson is simple, yet hard to swallow: trust but verify. Medicines can save lives, but blind trust can cost them. Every pill, every injection deserves questioning, especially when decline looks suspiciously swift. For Emily, this week became more than waiting for Buddy to recover. It became a shift in how she viewed her role as a caretaker. She had always thought love meant following instructions, doing exactly what the vet prescribed. Now she saw love could also mean questioning, asking why, searching for answers when something felt off. She remembered a story a friend once told her about wolves in Yellowstone. When researchers reintroduced wolves, they expected them to act one way, but the ecosystem responded in ways no one predicted. Sometimes knowledge lags behind reality. Medicine can be the same. What looks like a cure can hide consequences not yet understood. That perspective gave Emily strength to face the fear each night brought. Jonathan, still restless, reached out to colleagues. He phoned a vet in Tennessee who admitted she had stopped prescribing the same drug after 3 dogs in her care developed liver problems. Another in Kentucky shared records of a cougar in captivity who had shown identical symptoms: loss of appetite, jaundiced eyes, facial irritation before dying. The more Jonathan listened, the more he realized Buddy's case wasn't isolated. There were patterns, and patterns meant something larger than coincidence. Emily didn't know all the details yet, but she could sense from Jonathan's calls and late-night emails that something bigger was at play. She found herself wondering how many wild animals, how many beloved pets had suffered in silence, while their owners believed age was simply catching up with them. The mystery pressed heavier with each passing day. If this medicine were so dangerous, why hadn't it been pulled from the shelves? Why weren't owners warned? Through all of this, Emily learned the hardest discipline of all patients. Caring for a black bear cub wasn't like caring for a dog or a cat. Buddy couldn't tell her what hurt, couldn't signal clearly whether he was better or worse. She had to trust small signs, the twitch of an ear, the way his eyes followed her across the room, the strength in his paw as it pressed against her arm. Patience, she realized, wasn't passive. It was active. It meant watching closely, staying present, resisting the urge to rush into despair or false hope. By the end of the week, something undeniable had changed. Buddy, who had been too weak to move, now stood shakily on all fours. He sniffed the air, eyes brighter, fur less dull. He even pawed at the blanket, a clumsy attempt at play. Emily wept openly, scribbling every detail into her journal. When she called Jonathan with the update, his voice carried a mix of relief and urgency. "Bring him in," he said. "We need to see this for ourselves." Emily loaded Buddy back into the truck, her heart racing between dread and excitement. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. What she and Jonathan had glimpsed was only the beginning of a fight much larger than either of them expected. In uncovering the hidden danger of the medicine, they were stepping into a conflict that would pit them against forces far stronger than a single caretaker and her cub. Emily didn't sleep much that first week. Each night she set up a small cot near the wood stove, and the black bear cub curled just feet away on his quilt. She listened for every sound, each breath, each sigh, each restless shuffle. Sometimes Buddy seemed to breathe too shallow, and she sat upright, clutching the flashlight to check his chest. Sometimes his paws twitched in dreams, and for a fleeting second she saw the playful cub she once knew. But fear hung over her. She had agreed to stop all medication to trust Dr. Reed's instinct. If Buddy got worse, it would be on her. The weight of that choice pressed hard against her chest. She whispered prayers into the stillness. "Please let me have done the right thing." On the second night, Buddy refused food. Emily crushed berries into a small bowl, offered goat milk warmed over the stove, and even held pieces of apple near his nose. Nothing tempted him. She wrote it all down in her journal, each detail precise. Day 2, no appetite. Weak. Sleeping most of the time. That night she barely closed her eyes. She kept her hand resting on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his ribs. Every slower breath sent panic through her body. She thought about others who had stood watch like this, parents by hospital beds, pet owners on kitchen floors, wildlife rescuers tending to injured foxes or owls. In those moments, fear is the common language. You can't think about tomorrow, you live breath by breath. The fourth morning changed everything. Emily woke to a soft sound, a purr-like rumble she hadn't heard in weeks. Buddy nudged her hand, his nose cool and damp. He let out a faint huff, then pawed clumsily at the blanket. When she placed a bowl of berries in front of him, he ate slowly, one by one, his tongue sticky with juice. Tears blurred her eyes. She wrote furiously in her journal. Day 4 ate half a bowl of berries. More alert, energy returning. That entry felt like the first hopeful one in a long time. Buddy then surprised her even more. He spotted a fly buzzing near the window and staggered to his feet, swatting weakly at the air. For nearly an hour, he stumbled after the insect, determined in his clumsy chase. Emily laughed through tears, recording each detail for Jonathan. This wasn't just a cub hanging on. This was life flickering back. When animals recover from toxicity, the first signs are often small, an appetite, returning a spark of curiosity, renewed play. These changes matter more than blood test numbers because they show the body is reclaiming its rhythm. Because they show. Jonathan explained later that Buddy's liver was likely flushing out the leftover drug, slowly releasing its hold. Once the poison began to clear, his natural strength had room to return. This is a pattern many pet owners misunderstand. They expect a miracle turnaround or no change at all, but real healing is almost invisible at first. A cat starts grooming again, a dog wagging its tail, a bear cub chasing a fly. The lesson is simple: never dismiss small signs. In recovery, they are everything. Even as Buddy improved, Emily fought an inner war. Every night she wondered, What if this is temporary? What if tomorrow he collapses again? She kept picturing the moment in the clinic, the goodbye she almost gave. What if she had gone through with it? What if that tiny spark had been snuffed out before anyone noticed? She realized how thin the line is between despair and hope, how quickly one choice can tilt fate. It gave her a fresh perspective on all the moments in life where she had quit too soon, projects abandoned, friendships left behind, dreams shelved because she assumed they were dying. Buddy's flicker of recovery whispered to her, sometimes the story isn't over. Her thoughts returned to a story she'd once heard about a logger in West Virginia who rescued an injured deer fawn. Everyone told him it wouldn't survive the night, but he stayed by it, feeding with a bottle, keeping it warm. The fawn lived, was later released back into the forest. People said it was a miracle, but the logger always shook his head. It wasn't a miracle. It was just not giving up when it looked hopeless. Emily clung to that story now. Buddy's chase after the fly felt like the same stubborn refusal of death. At the clinic, Jonathan read Emily's nightly notes with growing astonishment. He compared them to toxicology charts cross-referencing known side effects of the drug. The data aligned appetite loss, lethargy, eye discoloration, then gradual improvement after withdrawal. He reached out to colleagues sharing Buddy's progress. One replied, "I've seen this too, but thought it was a coincidence." Another admitted she'd stopped prescribing the drug altogether. Jonathan's conviction grew. This wasn't just about Buddy. It was about exposing a danger hidden behind glossy pharmaceutical labels. But he kept his worry quiet for now, not wanting to weigh Emily down with more fear. For her, the only task was one night at a time. During those nights, Emily discovered something about herself. She realized that constant fear of the future robbed her of the present moments, the nudge of Buddy's paw, the softness of his fur, the sound of his awkward growl when he wanted more berries. She had been so afraid of losing him that she almost missed the joy of still having him. The small lesson was clear: when fear dominates, it blinds you to what is still here. Hope isn't about knowing the ending, it's about valuing the moment you still hold. By the end of the week, Buddy's energy grew more obvious. He explored the cabin again, nudging open the door with his nose sniffing at shelves. He pawed playfully at Emily's boots, leaving muddy prints on the floor. She laughed, scolding gently, "You rascal." It was the first time her laughter sounded light in weeks. When Jonathan arrived for the scheduled checkup, Buddy trotted wobbly but determined toward him. Jonathan bent down, stroking the cub's head, and smiled. "This is not the same animal I saw last week." He examined Buddy carefully, nodding as he observed brighter eyes, stronger reflexes. His relief was mixed with urgency. This was evidence proof they needed to document. Not just relief, but resolve. She realized his role wasn't only about saving one cub, it was about protecting countless others. For Jonathan, Buddy was becoming a symbol, a case that could uncover hidden truths in veterinary medicine. For Emily, Buddy was a reminder that trust is not passive. Trust meant listening closely, noticing details and recording each flicker of change. Trust was not blind faith. It was partnership with Jonathan, with Buddy. Even with the fragile thread of hope itself. As Jonathan packed up his tools, he looked at Emily. "This is bigger than we thought," he said quietly. "I've started finding other cases. We need to dig deeper." Emily nodded, glancing at Buddy curled once more by the fire, his chest rising steadily, his eyes bright again. She knew their journey had shifted from survival to something larger. What began as nights of fear and flickers of hope was about to turn into a search for proof and the hidden truth behind the medicine that nearly stole her cub. Jonathan's hands shook slightly as he flipped through the stack of notes Emily had brought to the clinic. Each page was filled with careful handwriting times. Buddy ate how much when he played, even when he simply lifted his head with interest. What struck Jonathan most wasn't just the improvement, it was the consistency. The moment the medicine stopped, Buddy's decline reversed. "This isn't chance," he murmured. Emily sat across from him, Buddy resting by her boots. "So you think it was the pills?" Jonathan nodded. "I do. And I'm starting to see he's not the only one." That week, Jonathan began calling every colleague he trusted. Some responded with polite confusion. Others hesitated, lowering their voices as they admitted similar suspicions. A vet in Virginia told him about 2 Labrador retrievers who had stopped eating after weeks on the same drug. A sanctuary worker in Kentucky remembered a cougar that collapsed after months of treatment. A colleague in Tennessee said she had quietly pulled the medication from her shelves after 3 dogs died suddenly. The pattern grew unmistakable. Animals across different states, different species, all showing the same strange signs. Eye discoloration, fatigue, loss of appetite, and unexplained liver damage. Jonathan gathered the reports, building a file thicker by the day. He sent lab samples from Buddy to a regional toxicology center, pushing for results. Late one night, he stared at the growing pile of evidence and whispered, "It's not just Buddy, it's bigger than we thought." The deeper he dug, the more frustrated he became. Veterinary drugs go through testing, yes, but the oversight isn't always as strict as people imagine. In many cases, trials are small side effects, are underreported, and long-term impacts are barely studied. Once approved, the drugs flood clinics across the country. By the time problems appear, they are often brushed off as rare coincidences or blamed on aging. Jonathan realized the regulatory gap was like a wide crack in the floor hidden under a rug until animals started falling through. And it wasn't just a scientific problem, it was a moral one. While Jonathan searched for proof, Emily focused on Buddy. Each day she added more hopeful notes to the journal, climbed onto the porch today, ate a full meal of berries and milk, played with the broom handle. She smiled as she wrote, but inside she battled unease. What if Buddy was better only for now? What if Jonathan's push for answers stirred trouble that might hurt them both? One evening she called Jonathan. "Do you think speaking up will change anything?" He paused before answering. "Change always starts small, Emily. But silence keeps animals in danger." As whispers spread, Jonathan's calls weren't always welcome. One manufacturer representative emailed him sharply. "There is no proven link between our medication and animal fatalities. Suggest you review your clinical practices before spreading rumors." A week later, a letter arrived on clinic stationery, formal cold warning that his speculation could harm the company's reputation. The message was clear: stop digging or be discredited. Jonathan read the letter aloud to Emily in the clinic office. She clenched her fists. They'd rather protect their image than the animal's suffering. He folded the letter carefully and set it aside. That's how pressure works. But if we stop now, Buddy's recovery means nothing to anyone else. Emily thought of a story she'd once read about a group of researchers in Alaska. They had discovered pollutants in the salmon population, chemicals from upstream factories. At first, no one believed them. Industry groups dismissed the findings, accused them of sloppy science. But the researchers persisted, publishing data showing evidence. Years later, new laws were passed to protect the rivers. "Every big fight starts with people saying you're wrong," she told Jonathan quietly. "Maybe that means you're on the right track." It's easy to believe courage is about bold speeches or dramatic stands. But here, courage looked different. It was Emily writing in her journal each night, even when fear told her to stop hoping. It was Jonathan picking up the phone again and again, knowing some colleagues would dismiss him. Courage was quiet persistence, the choice to keep moving forward when silence would be easier. The small lesson Emily and Jonathan shared was this: the truth rarely reveals itself all at once. It builds piece by piece like Buddy's recovery. You have to gather it, trust it, and hold it steady even when others try to shake it loose. Jonathan began to see Buddy not just as a patient, but as a symbol of something larger. Every poor step Buddy took around the clinic was proof of resilience. Every note Emily wrote was testimony. The fresh perspective hit Jonathan during a late-night call with a colleague. If one cub can reveal this pattern, how many more animals could be spared if we listen? For Emily, the perspective was more personal. She realized her bond with Buddy was not just about comfort or love, it was about responsibility. By stepping forward, by sharing their story, she could help other caretakers recognize warning signs, sooner protect other animals from the same fate. But resistance grew. A second letter arrived, this one from corporate lawyers, hinting at legal consequences if Jonathan continued defaming their product. Rumors spread among local clinics that he was reckless, unreliable. Jonathan kept the letters in a drawer, not telling Emily how heavily they weighed on him. One night, Emily found him sitting in the darkened exam room, staring at Buddy through the kennel bars. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. He sighed. "I became a vet to heal animals, not to fight corporations. But sometimes the two can't be separated." Buddy lifted his head, eyes bright, and let out a soft grunt. It was as though the cub himself reminded them both why the fight mattered. By the end of the month, Jonathan's file held dozens of cases, toxicology reports, and Emily's meticulous journal. Proof was mounting, patterns were undeniable, and pushback was intensifying. Emily looked at Jonathan one evening as they reviewed the stack together. What happens when the truth is too loud for them to ignore? Jonathan closed the folder, his voice steady. "Then they'll try to silence us another way." The storm was moving from quiet threats to confrontation. What began as a fight for one cub's life was about to lead them into a boardroom where money, power, and truth would collide. The letter came on a Monday morning, printed on thick paper with the company's logo embossed at the top. Emily found Jonathan standing at the clinic's front desk, reading it with a clenched jaw. The letter wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Pet Pharma Corp wanted him and Emily in their Charlotte office for a discussion. Emily's stomach tightened. "Do we go?" Jonathan folded the letter carefully. "We don't have a choice. If we ignore them, they'll bury us in silence. If we go, maybe we'll finally see what they're hiding." On the drive, Buddy stayed at the sanctuary under the care of a trusted colleague. Emily stared out the window at the rolling hills giving way to the city skyline. She thought about the cub curled on his quilt alive because of one small pause in a clinic room. That pause had led them here to confront people who had never met Buddy but whose decisions nearly cost his life. Jonathan gripped the wheel tighter the closer they got closer. He'd faced surgeries, emergencies, even death in his practice, but nothing like this. "They won't make this easy," he said quietly. "They'll test us." The company's office tower gleamed with mirrored glass. Inside, they were led to a boardroom too large for comfort, its polished tables stretching between them and three executives. The man at the center introduced himself as Mr. Carver, head of product development. His tone was smooth, his smile practiced. "We've reviewed your concerns," he began, "and we understand your passion for animal welfare. But you must realize how dangerous unverified claims can be." Jonathan slid the file across the table. "These aren't claims. These are medical records, lab reports, and documented cases. The patterns are clear." Carver leafed through the papers with disinterest as though flipping a menu. Finally, he looked up. "We appreciate your diligence, but we see no conclusive evidence that our product is at fault." The room grew colder as Carver leaned forward. "We do, however, have a solution. If you agree to stop discussing this publicly, we're prepared to offer compensation. Substantial compensation." Emily's breath caught. "You want us to stay quiet while animals keep suffering?" Carver's smile didn't falter. "We want to prevent unnecessary panic. Imagine headlines screaming that a trusted medication is unsafe. People would stop treatment, animals might go untreated, and worse outcomes could follow. Sometimes protecting the public means controlling the story." Jonathan felt a chill crawl down his spine. "So you'd rather protect your reputation than the animals depending on you?" Carver's eyes hardened. "We're offering you a chance to walk away. Think carefully before refusing." Emily thought of a story her father once told her about coal miners in West Virginia. Years before, they had discovered unsafe working conditions. Management offered payouts to keep quiet. Some accepted fearing for their jobs, but silence costs lives. Only when whistleblowers spoke out did safety laws change. She looked at Carver, then at Jonathan, and whispered, "If we say yes, Buddy's story dies with us." What Emily realized in that room was simple silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. Choosing silence means siding with harm, even if the harm isn't seen right away. The small lesson she carried from Buddy to this boardroom was that hope requires a voice. Without it, even miracles fade into nothing. Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. For years, he had thought his role as a veterinarian was limited to his clinic, his patients, and the families who trusted him. But this moment gave him a fresh perspective. Sometimes healing requires stepping beyond the exam table into uncomfortable battles. Buddy wasn't just a cub to be saved, he was proof that the system needed to be challenged. Instead of outright refusal, Jonathan chose caution. He closed the file gently and said, "We need time to consider your offer." Carver leaned back, clearly satisfied. "Of course. Take a few days. I think you'll see reason." When they left the boardroom, Emily turned to Jonathan in the elevator. "We're not really considering it, are we?" He shook his head. "No. But if we slam the door now, they'll come after us harder. We need to be smart, keep them calm while we gather more proof." The drive back to the mountains was quiet. Emily stared at the horizon, replaying the meeting in her mind. The polished smiles, the calculated offer, the emptiness behind corporate words. She thought of Buddy again, the weight of his small paw curling into her jacket during that first goodbye. That simple act of trust had led them to uncover danger, hiding in plain sight. "Jonathan," she said softly, "what if they try to stop us?" "They already are," he replied. "But truth has a way of spreading when it's too big to contain." Later that night, Emily remembered a story from a friend who worked in wildlife rescue. A group had fought for years to ban a harmful pesticide after seeing it poison birds. The company behind it denied responsibility, lobbied politicians, and threatened lawsuits. Yet eventually the truth broke through because people refused to back down. The pesticide was banned, and bird populations slowly recovered. The reminder gave Emily strength. If they think money will make us forget, they don't understand caretakers like us. Jonathan filed away the company's letter with the others, but this one felt heavier. The meeting confirmed what he suspected. This wasn't just about medicine. It was about power, image, and control. He knew pushback would grow sharper, perhaps even dangerous. Yet the choice was already made. In the quiet of the clinic that evening, Buddy waddled over and pressed his head against Jonathan's knee. The cub's warmth, his steady breathing, reminded Jonathan why he couldn't walk away. Emily closed her journal that night with trembling hands. She wrote only one line. The fight has left the clinic and entered their world. The meeting had changed everything. The story was no longer about a cub's recovery. It was about a growing storm that would spill into courtrooms, headlines, and homes across the country. The first headline appeared 2 weeks after the meeting: "Wildlife vet raises alarm over pet drug risks." Within hours, Jonathan's phone lit up with calls. Local news stations wanted interviews. Animal sanctuaries asked for details. And tucked among the questions came messages from ordinary pet owners. "My dog was on that pill too." "Our cat stopped eating after months of treatment. Could this be connected?" Emily read the emails with tears stinging her eyes. Each story felt like another voice joining theirs, another echo of what Buddy had endured. For the first time, she realized they weren't standing alone. When Pet Farmer filed a lawsuit accusing Jonathan of defamation, it wasn't a surprise. The company's lawyers argued that his claims threatened profits and public trust. But Jonathan had prepared. He arrived at the courthouse with Emily by his side, Buddy's recovery journal under her arm, and a binder of veterinary records from across the region. Inside the courtroom, the company's attorneys spoke smoothly of rare coincidences and unfounded speculation. But when Jonathan testified, his voice held the steady weight of lived truth. He described Buddy's symptoms, the reversal after stopping the medicine, and the pattern across multiple cases. Emily followed her testimony, simple yet powerful. She described nights of fear, days of careful observation, and the joy of seeing Buddy chase a fly again. The judge leaned forward as she read from her journal. Day 4, ate half a bowl of berries. More alert, energy returning. It was more than data. It was proof that behind every statistic lived a real animal, a real bond. As the trial unfolded, the courthouse steps filled with people. Families carried framed photos of dogs, cats, even horses they believed had suffered from the same drug. A woman held a sign reading, "My Bailey deserved better." An elderly man stood silently with a leash dangling empty from his hand. Animal rescue groups spoke out, sharing similar experiences. Wildlife caretakers posted videos describing unexplained losses. Even other veterinarians began to testify, no longer willing to stay silent. Each voice added weight, turning Buddy's story into a chorus. Emily remembered watching footage from years ago when a group of citizens rallied to save a stretch of forest in North Carolina from logging. At first, only a handful stood at the gates. But day by day more arrived, farmers, teachers, retirees, until the crowd was too large to ignore. In the end, the forest remained standing because enough voices joined as one. Now, standing outside the courthouse, she felt that same current of unity. "This isn't just our fight anymore," she whispered to Jonathan. News outlets began covering Buddy's case nationwide. Headlines read, "Vet claims pet drug endangers animals in caretaker's journal." Sparks investigation. Interviews aired on evening broadcasts showing Emily's trembling voice recounting Buddy's near goodbye. Clips of the cub, now healthier and lively, ran alongside. Viewers saw not just a black bear cub, but a symbol of resilience. The company tried to counter with glossy ads and public statements. They claimed the medicine was safe, that opponents were misinformed. But the more they spoke, the more the public pressed for answers. Questions filled the comment sections. If it's safe, why so many similar cases? Why silence a vet instead of investigating? Beyond the headlines, the trial carried weight because it challenged a deeper issue: accountability. Pet medications often slip under the radar, trusted without question. But Jonathan's case forced regulators, veterinarians, and the public to ask hard questions. How thoroughly are these drugs tested? How quickly are warnings issued? Who decides when profits outweigh risks? The explanation was simple, but sobering oversight often lags behind reality. Until enough voices demand attention, problems remain buried. Emily found herself repeating one thought during the trial: grief multiplies in silence. Each person who spoke out, each pet owner who stepped forward, lessened the loneliness of loss. The small lesson she carried was that sharing pain not only honors those lost, it protects those still alive. Her voice shook on the stand, but when she saw the crowd outside, she knew her words carried further than the walls of the courtroom. For Jonathan, the trial reshaped his understanding of his role. He had always thought of himself as one vet in a small mountain clinic. Now he saw himself as part of something larger, a chain of caretakers, owners, rescuers, each linked by their willingness to stand up for animals who couldn't speak. Buddy wasn't just his patient. He was proof that even the smallest creature could spark a movement. The fresh perspective humbled him. Healing isn't always one-to-one. Sometimes it spreads outward, multiplying through stories and voices until it changes the world. Weeks passed. The trial dragged on, evidence piling higher. Toxicology reports confirmed liver damage in multiple animals tied to the drug. Journal entries from other owners matched Emily's notes, almost word for word. The company's defense grew weaker, its arguments stretched thin. One afternoon, as the court adjourned, Jonathan whispered to Emily, "We're close. They can't deny this forever." She nodded, her eyes on the courthouse steps crowded with supporters. Among them, she spotted a young boy holding a stuffed bear, his mother's hand resting on his shoulder. The sight pierced her heart. This fight wasn't only about Buddy, it was about what children would inherit: a world that either protected the voiceless or ignored them. Yet even as hope grew, a shadow lingered. Jonathan knew corporations rarely fold easily. If they lost in court, they would look for other ways to maintain control. Pressure could mount, threats could sharpen. The mystery wasn't whether they had enough proof, it was how far the company might go to silence it. On the final day of testimony, Emily closed her journal and looked at Buddy resting in his carrier. His eyes were bright, his fur glossy once more. She bent down, pressing her forehead to his. "No matter what happens, you changed everything." The verdict was near, but the impact was already spreading. What started with one cub's near goodbye had become a nationwide reckoning. The courtroom battle wasn't the end. It was the beginning of change. The verdict finally came on a crisp autumn morning. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the decision. Pet farmer would pay damages, recall the medicine, and submit to federal investigation. The company's lawyers sat frozen, their polished arguments crumbling under the weight of undeniable proof. Emily gripped Jonathan's hand, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was a safeguard for countless animals yet to be harmed. Outside supporters cheered. Pet owners held photos, high tears streaking down their faces. Reporters crowded forward, microphones raised. But Emily's eyes searched for one face only. She found Buddy in his carrier paw, pressed against the bars, eyes gleaming. She lifted him into her arms, whispering, "We did it, little one." In the weeks that followed, the settlement money became seed for something greater. The Buddy Foundation. Jonathan and Emily launched it with one simple mission: to protect animals through safer medicines, transparent research, and education for caretakers everywhere. They began funding independent labs to test veterinary drugs, giving pet owners access to data companies preferred to keep hidden. Sanctuary across the Appalachian Mountains received grants to strengthen wildlife rescue efforts. Clinics in small towns gained resources to monitor drug safety. What began with a black bear cub in one caretaker's arms now touched lives across the country. One evening, Emily received a letter from a family in Ohio. Their Labrador Daisy had been on the same medication. After hearing Buddy's story, they stopped it under veterinary supervision. Within weeks, Daisy's appetite returned, her energy back. "Your courage gave us more time with her," the letter read. Another message came from a wildlife photographer in Montana who lost a rescued lynx to unexplained illness. He wrote, "Knowing the truth doesn't heal my loss, but it gives me peace and it will save others." Each story reminded Emily that Buddy's fight had grown into something larger than either she or Jonathan had imagined. Legacies are often spoken of as grand things. Monuments, awards, histories written in books. But Emily saw legacy in smaller ways. It was in the child who brought her a stuffed bear at a sanctuary event saying, "This is Buddy's twin." It was in the elderly woman who whispered, "My cat was saved because of you." It was in every paw print pressed into the soft earth of the Appalachian forest, each one proof that animals deserve to live without hidden dangers hanging over them. Through it all, Emily carried one lesson close to her heart: the most powerful changes often begin in quiet moments. A goodbye hug in a clinic, a trembling paw curled into a jacket, a choice to question instead of accept. That lesson isn't just for caretakers of wild animals, it's for anyone who has ever felt powerless against larger forces. Change doesn't start in boardrooms or headlines. It starts with the courage to notice, to speak, to persist. Jonathan began holding workshops for veterinarians, teaching them to recognize early signs of drug toxicity, to document cases, and to push back when things didn't add up. He reminded them that medicine is never beyond question, that skepticism and compassion must walk together. "Animals can't tell us when something's wrong," he told a gathering once. "That means it's our responsibility to listen harder, to trust what we see, even if it challenges what we're told." For Emily, knowledge came in a simpler form. She now taught caretakers how to keep journals, how to track symptoms, and how to trust their instincts when something felt off. She believed every caretaker, every pet owner could be the voice their animal could not provide. The fresh perspective both of them gained was clear. Buddy wasn't just saved, he became a guide. His near death wasn't only a tragedy avoided, but a door into a new understanding of what caretaking truly means. It isn't just feeding, sheltering, or loving. It's being willing to question, to protect, to fight when silence would be easier. And in that perspective lies hope, not just for Buddy, not just for pets or wild animals across the country, but for anyone who believes that one small life, one small voice can matter. Even as the foundation grew and changes began to ripple through veterinary circles, one mystery lingered. How many more hidden dangers existed unnoticed, waiting in the shadows? Jonathan knew Buddy's case was not the last. But instead of dread, that mystery fueled him. He had seen firsthand how a community could rise, how truth could break silence. The unknown wasn't something to fear. It was a challenge to meet with vigilance and compassion. Months later, on a quiet evening, Emily sat on her porch with Buddy at her feet. The cub was larger now, strong enough to clamber up the steps on his own, curious enough to nose through her gardening gloves. She stroked his fur, remembering the day she nearly said goodbye. She thought about the boardroom, the courtroom, the crowds, the foundation, and she smiled at the simple truth. None of it would have happened without that first hug, that last embrace that turned into a second chance. She whispered to Buddy, "You weren't just saved, you saved so many others. Now I want to turn that reflection to you. Maybe you've walked through nights of fear with a pet, a friend, or even yourself. Maybe you've felt powerless against something larger, an illness, a loss, a system that didn't seem to care. Buddy's story shows that even in the smallest signs, a change in breath, a flicker of energy, a paw pressed into your hand, there can be the beginning of transformation. Ask yourself what in your life looks like it's ending, but may only be waiting for your courage to question, to notice, to believe in one more flicker of hope. Buddy's journey touched you? If it reminded you of your own bond with an animal, or of the quiet power of persistence, we'd love for you to stay with us. Share your own story in the comments, your Buddy, your Daisy, your Bailey. Let these stories become a chorus just as they did outside that courthouse. And if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience, connection, and the wild animals who teach us how to live with heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It means more than you know. And it helps us keep sharing the voices that too often go unheard. Because sometimes one hug, whether from a black bear cub, a family pet, or someone you love, can change more than a moment. It can change everything.